is the assignment we did in class to draw some fruits. So I'm going to show you some tricks that I learned to draw nice, clean, smooth gradient lines. So to start with, I made a quick demo here. In this example, what the goal is to draw a nice diagonal line using the mesh gradient tool. So what you could use this for is maybe a highlight on, or a shading on a shape. So the first try that we've done here is by using two anchor points that are diagonal from each other. But you can see here, it doesn't connect the color between them. The color transitions back to blue a little bit, and we just have two dots here that are separate from each other. So if we tried to shade a shape, and this is what our mesh looks like, we'd get something like this. So this gradient here, you can see it goes down and then it steps down again. And this highlight gets this really ugly jagged shape instead of a nice smooth gradient shape like we'd want in the actual photo. So the way that you can fix this is make sure that between two points, if you want them to be filled in with the same color, they should be not diagonal, but like along the same line. So what I've done here is I've drawn a mesh shape with just one line down the center and I've twisted it. So the mesh line runs between these 2 points directly. And this will get the nice solid color that we want. And then to make sure that these areas down here and up here don't have too much yellow, I've gone in with the direct selection tool. And you can see I pushed out the handle really, really far. So the handle will actually change how far the gradient goes out. So by pushing this up here, I've tried to fill in this area with blue. Again, this bottom one here is really pushed out. And then this anchor here, these ones are very, very short. So the yellow doesn't bleed outwards too much. But these ones connecting the two are very long and point directly at each other, so that we get a nice clean diagonal shape here. So that's how you avoid having a jagged outline between your shapes. So another important thing to remember is that once you have a lot of mesh lines, it gets really, really complicated to edit. It's really hard to get smooth gradients. It's really hard to edit the outline to be smooth. So you want to get the basic shape and edit the shape with when you still have as few mesh lines as you can. So we're going to start with one of the basic shapes. It's much better to start with a basic shape and edit the shape to whatever you want than it is to start with a freeform shape, because it can get very messy with a freeform shape. So to start with, I'm going to draw a circle that's about the size we want. And I'm going to convert this to a mesh shape by adding a mesh line by clicking on the path. We're going to add a nice arc with something like this. Then we're going to rotate this so it fits the shape of the fruit. So before I keep going, I want to give a good tip. When you're working with a gradient mesh, it's really helpful to work with outline mode. So we can go to outline mode by doing Command or Control Y, but this will put the image as well into outline mode, and then we can't see our reference anymore. So instead of doing that, do Command or Control click on the eye here to just change the layer you're working in into outline mode, and then we can still see the image, but the color won't be filled in. So then using the direct selection tool to edit the mesh gradient lines, I'm gonna push the arc about the shape I want it to follow this line here. And while the shape is still so simple, this is where we're going to start changing the outline and fitting it into the shape of the fruit itself. Once we make the shape more complicated, it would get really, really difficult to get a nice, clean, smooth line around the edge of the shape. There we go. So once we have something we're happy with, we can start going and adding more mesh gradient lines. And now that we have the basic shape, anything else we add is going to follow the shape that we have. So I'm going to go in and add another line very close to the original arc that we drew here. And what these two lines are going to do is draw the crease in the fruit. So one of the lines we're going to color dark, and the other we're going to color light. And they're going to be very close to each other. And that's going to give this highlight here on this part of the fruit. And then we want to decide where we want the general areas of color to be. So on this shape, I can see there's a highlight here. There's this nice pink tone here. There's a darker shape here, which is a nice dark purple. And then there's another highlight over here. So we want a mesh gradient lines intersection at the center of the patches of color we're aiming for. So using the mesh gradient tool, I'm going to click on the edge. I'm going to start by doing this highlight here. And I want the line to pass through just the center of that color. So when I've got something I'm happy with, I'm going to add the other line intersection. And now we can color this point the color of this highlight. So I'm going to go for another intersection down here, about here, and I'm going to make this the nice pink color. And I'm going to go for one last intersection down here for the deep purple. We're going to try one here as well for this highlight. So now that we have just you want to use as few nodes as you can get away with so that the gradient is nice and smooth. If you have a lot of gradient lines, you have to edit the colors very carefully so it's a smooth transition between them, and it gets really tedious. Using as few lines as possible will make it go a lot faster and make your overall shape look nicer too. So now that we have the mesh gradient, we can start by we can go in and color all of the points. So using the direct selection handle tool, you can select one node at a time or shift click multiple nodes, or you can use the lasso tool, which is Q on your keyboard, to select more at once. So I think for this shape, I'm going to do each point individually. I'll just show you the first few and then I'll do the rest sped up. So I'm going to zoom in, click on the point I want to color, go to the eyedropper tool, which is I on your keyboard, click right next to the point, select the color, and that'll change. I have this point selected, it'll change the color of that point. If we exit outline mode, we can see that this point here has been shaded the nice bright pink color. So I'm going to go repeat that process for all of the points on this shape. So there we go. I'm going to go back to out of outline mode to see what it looks like so far. I intentionally haven't done the top part of the fruit because that's going to be a little bit more difficult. So we can see so far it looks okay. This part here, though, doesn't have really enough definition. So I think we need another mesh line. Let's go back to outline view and add another line right in the center of this highlight here. And then we can go and add these colors here along it to make them more exact to the shape. And since we already had most of the outlines, when we add new shapes, they'll follow along and automatically put in the gradient. So it's still going to be very smooth farther down here. And in that way, we can fix up the shape, add more details as we want, but our basic shape is going to still stay the same because we did that when it was still very simple. So for up here, we don't want the crease of the fruit to continue up this high. We want it to smooth out where the stem comes out. So to do that, I'm going to go back to outline mode for easy editing. And where these two lines are very close together, I'm going to just spread them out. So clicking along the edge, take the anchor point, and just move them away from each other a little bit. And then I'm going to go back in and fix all of the handles that are running into each other. Now that we have the basic shape that we want, you can see that the crease diffuses at the edge here. It doesn't stay as sharp. Now I'm gonna go and put in a few more mesh gradient lines to get more of the tones here at the top of the fruit, and then go in and fill in the colors for all of these. There you go, I think I'm happy with that. So that's how I draw the basic shape of the fruit using the mesh gradient tool. So I'm gonna show you what I did on my final version for the other details of it. And I'm just gonna tell you what I did, not show you the process step by step. So the stem is built from a rectangle that has two mesh gradient lines added vertically and a couple horizontally as well. Then the base is rounded and the colors are filled in. This shape here is the dark brown part, which is the base of the tip of the stem. Then there's another lighter brown color on top of it. This darker brown color here, I wanted a mottled look to match the photo more closely rather than just one tone. So I did a freeform shape and then just added a bunch of mesh lines, not really caring if it was smooth because the point was that it looked messy and broken, which is how the photo looks. For the leaf, I did a freeform shape, added mesh lines, and filled them in. Then for the stems, I used the pen tool, drew some curves, used the width tool to make them narrow out at the end, and then added transparency to them. The main stem here, I did the same thing using the width tool to make it narrow out. Then I went to Object, Path, Outline Stroke to convert it to a shape. Then I converted the shape to a mesh gradient by just adding one line along the edge. And in that way, I could make the base a more yellow color and the tip a greener color. To make the rough edge of the leaf, I used a white shape overlaying and have a jagged edge to cut through the shape. I used two shapes, one at this edge and one at the bottom here. For the shadow from the leaf, I used a rounded edge rectangle shape with a radial gradient. The radial gradient is squashed, and it goes from black to a transparent color. The water droplet is made with one ellipse, which is a mesh gradient, which has one highlight up at the top here. And then there's a separate highlight here, which is an ellipse with just a radial gradient going from white to transparent pink. So maybe I can look at the gradient here to show you. No, it doesn't show, but it's fine. And then the last step for the water droplet is to add a small drop shadow, which I can show you here. What I used, 50% opacity, 3% blur, a dark purple color, 2-point offset, and 3-point blur. And then the last step is just this little base shadow here. It's a radial gradient that's cut off on one side. So that's how you draw this plum. The peach here is drawn with the same method, just starting with an ellipse. I drew the crease shape, added a few more points. I smoothed out the top here. I put this mesh lines to follow this where the color is going. And then I added just more mesh lines to add more detail. The leaf is drawn the same way with a white overlapping shape to cut it. And there's a small shadow here for the pit, which is a dark brown color on this one. You can see the full mesh I used compared to the photo here. And the base shadow is drawn with a mesh gradient that's black in the center and white on the edges. So I hope this was helpful in drawing your own mesh gradient.